Welcome back, everyone, to Openline. Glad you are with us tonight. We are talking about the war in Afghanistan. American troops have left the country. President Biden spoke today. We have a bunch of calls, people wanting to talk about it. Dr. Thomas Schwartz, Vanderbilt Political Science Professor, joins us via Zoom. And I'm just going to go to calls here. Let's go to Mike. Hello, Mike.
And good evening, Ben. And good evening to Mr. Schwartz. First of all, Ben, I know you're a reader. First of all, it's a book called The Afghanistan Papers. Very simple. The Afghanistan Papers. This book is written by Craig Whitlock. Craig Whitlock. This needs to be read because if you want to get through all the maze of what Afghanistan and the whole history of that war was about, including Iraq, this is a book you need to read because it basically tells of how three successive presidents and their military commanders deceived the public year after year about America's longest war, foreshadowing the Taliban's recapture of Afghanistan. It also tells about how President Bush at one point didn't even know our Afghanistan war commander and didn't even want to take time to meet him. It also talks about Donald Rumsfeld, how he admitted he had no visibility into what the bad guys were and who they were. And Robert Gates, the former the latter after him, said basically what I can repeat on the air is that we don't have jack blank about Al-Qaeda. And basically we were in a war that was unwinnable. We were distracted 2 years later by Iraq, thanks to George Bush, that we didn't have to do with Saddam Hussein. And basically, it took guts to do what Joe Biden did. It was going to have to happen. Nobody wanted it on their watch because they knew it was going to be some things that were just not going to go right when you've been in the war 20 years. But he had the courage to do it anyway. And I first want to give my sympathy and condolences to those who have served in Afghanistan and the ones who recently passed at 13. But it would have been more than that if we had to continue to stay in Afghanistan, and that's the reality. And if you want the true story of what's happened, read the Afghanistan Papers by Craig Whitlock, and I hope everybody will do that. And thanks for your time.
Thank you, Mike. Okay, what do you think of all he's saying there? It took courage is what he's saying, and I don't know if you know about the book he's talking about or the papers, but what do you think of that call?
Well, you know, the Afghanistan Papers is going to have an impact. It's a bit like the Pentagon Papers did on the Vietnam War. It's one version of what happened. It's selective. Not all the documents are available. It is designed to tell a particular story. It is argumentative, and it's a bit it's biased, to put it mildly. I mean, there is a direction there with a particular point of view. Did this decision require the president to have courage? I would imagine yes, but it also required judgment and thought about what the consequences would be. And I think that you could make a case that this was also a very political decision. The original decision was to be timed to September 11th, and the idea of celebrating the 20 years that he was out of office, or that the United States was out of the war. So there were political motives as well as a motive of courage. I'm not so sure. I'm not completely in agreement with the caller on that one. I think this was also politically driven by a view without necessarily the judgment about what the consequences would be in Afghanistan.
Let's go to another Mike. This is rare. We have back-to-back mics. Oh boy, it's Evelyn.
Hey, it's Evelyn. Correct.
Evelyn, sorry, it's not back-to-back mics. Go right ahead, Evelyn.
No problem. I'm going to need the rest of the show.
The rest of the show? Oh no, Evelyn. No.
The rest, yes. So I've got a dozen main points. Firstly, going back to what your gentleman guest said about there just wasn't time. There just wasn't time to get all the equipment and the ammunition and the guns and the night vision out. There was time. They just did not plan properly. You know, think about when you move your house. You got a big house with kids and animals and things, and you've lived there for 20 years. You don't wait till the last minute. They've had months and months to get this all planned out logistically, and it's a colossal disaster. Beyond that, what one of your callers said about who have they brought here. I firmly believe that when the light was shown upon this mess about a week and a half ago in the mainstream media, they just started shoveling people onto the planes so they could pump those numbers up. There's already been found that one rapist got into our country that had already been deported once. Now, sure, that's just one person, but I believe, unfortunately, we're going to find more. So I hope they are sussing out all these people at our bases here and abroad to really try to vet them and find out if they should have ever been put on the planes to send them back. And beyond that, I really have an issue with the way Biden keeps trying to frame the argument, saying we needed to leave. Nobody wanted to be in that war. Okay, there's probably most of us agree that we did not want to have our people there anymore. But beyond that, that is not what mostly all of us have an issue with, is the way that it was done. Hopefully there's going to be a big postmortem, and it might be that it's the culture of the military to pass the buck and cover up for people, and possibly for the people on the ground that really see what's going on. Maybe they don't want to tell the upper brass, hey, this place is going to fall apart. I think they knew it 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years ago. And no one wanted to face the truth of that the Afghan National Army was not going to be able to hold down the fort, literally.
Right.
And it's turned into a giant debacle. And the way that it was done, even from leaving Bagram Air Force Base and letting the Taliban take that over, and in proximity, it's not that far from Kabul. And they could have had those two places to stage people and maybe to go out and pick people up, and Americans. And take them to one or the other.
All right, I want to talk about that. Thank you, Evelyn, for your call. All right, she's saying they did have time. She's questioning a lot of things, but the arbitrary deadline, she says it's arbitrary. When you're moving, you can set your own time when you want to leave. What do you think about that comment?
Well, I think that's right. I mean, you asked me whether, why would we leave stuff behind? And I said because they didn't have time. But the unwritten point is that Biden set the deadline and decided he wanted to keep it, even though he had at times said that we should not keep it if there were still Americans there. This was designed. This is very much the president's desire to get out. One of your callers said it was courageous, but this was Joe Biden wanted out of Afghanistan as strongly as possible, and he did. He got us out, but he also there were a lot of consequences from the speed and direction which we did it in, and that's where the debacle comes in.
Let's go to Taylor. Taylor, hello.
Hi, Ben, and good evening to the professor. I've got a little story to tell here that I never hear anyone else speak about, and this comes from a fellow I spent an hour with the other night. He was an Afghan soldier. He's an Afghan citizen with an American green card. He's been here 7 years, but he spent 8 years in the Afghan army, and he's been in constant contact, and the story is going to be told truthfully soon, probably, on the Afghan army. It's a sad tale. It wasn't ever an army of total 300,000 people. There might have been that many people on the cash payroll that the United States was paying at all times. But this is what he indicated to me. Once the first announcement was made that they were going to pull out of the country, things started slowly going to hell at that point. These soldiers were peasants and tribes people. They never had an army put together like we visualize our own army, or even the army of North Korea or anywhere else. These guys mainly depended on the United States soldiers to lead them into fight. And when they did, they fought. If they got in a lot of trouble, the main thing that they depended on was those helicopter gunships would always be able to get to them help them out. But this is the sad part. He says for the last 7 or 8 months, things kept deteriorating within those ranks. Pay started getting cut, probably not from our payroll, but somewhere along the line. He said ammunition was quite often scarce, and these guys knew the end was coming for the end of their job, their fight.
Right.
And so, and sometimes they were a whole month would be skipped. The point is, there was so much graft going on with contractors. That U.S. embassy in Kabul is the most expensive in the world. We spent $800 million on that, and so firstly, corrupt government, and most of them have been corrupt all the way through, even the better ones.
All right, well, let's talk about...
These people knew that. And so once that airfield was closed and those helicopters, and these guys knew they were on their own and they would be screwed.
All right, I'm gonna cut you off because we have a ton of callers, but his point about the Afghan army, it clearly wasn't what it was advertised as, I guess. I mean, what can you say briefly about the Afghan army?
Briefly, there was a lot of corruption. We know that. There were payrolls. There were a lot of phantom soldiers who did not exist, but money was siphoned off. No question. With all that in consideration, the Afghans still lost about 60,000 men fighting in this battle. They were not completely. They did fight, and the caller made that clear. They fought in part. They were integrated into an American way of combat, in which the United States did provide assistance and help them to fight. Unfortunately, they did not. There was not the attempt to make them really an independent force. And so when we cut them off at the knees, essentially, by taking away air support, we really rendered them to be very vulnerable. And I think it wasn't all that surprising that most surrendered in that case.
Wow. All right, we're going to take a break. Just tons of calls. We'll come back, take more calls right after this.